All right, let's jump right into this explanator on the 10 recitations Vinaya. Today, we're unpacking something pretty incredible, the ancient rules of daily living for Buddhist monks. We're talking about the precise behavioral norms of monastic life, specifically how they handled clothing, the strict do's and don'ts of using leather, and exactly what they were allowed to wear on their feet. It's an absolutely fascinating look at where strict spiritual discipline meets everyday on-the-ground practicality.
Here's how we're breaking it down today. We'll start with Srona and the borderlands, move into exceptions for rough terrain, look at the strict footwear precepts, discuss leather skins and high beds, explore compassion and daily conduct, and wrap up with the true spirit of these rules. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Srona and the Borderlands. So, to really understand these texts, we first need to meet our guide, Srona Kotakarna, a monk hailing from the incredibly rough, rocky borderlands of Avanti.
Srona's life was literally a wild ride. He actually started out as a wealthy merchant, facing these terrifying life-or-death perils out at sea. I mean, surviving those voyages and experiencing some deep, core-shaking visions totally changed his trajectory. He ends up meeting the elder monk Mahakayana and decides, you know what, I'm going to ordain. Fast forward a bit, and he's traveling east to Shravasti to meet the Buddha face-to-face, bringing along some incredibly specific real-world dilemmas about monastic living.
That brings us to Section 2, Exceptions for Rough Terrain. Because the core issue Srona brought to the Buddha was, well, geography.
You see, the strict daily rules were originally designed for the softer, more populated central lands, and they just didn't work in the harsh terrain of Avanti. But here's what's so cool about the Buddha's response. He wasn't rigidly dogmatic at all. He adapted the rules to fit the reality on the ground. Avanti's super rocky? Okay, fixed shoes are allowed. The local culture relies on water for purity? Frequent bathing gets the green light.
In fact, his teacher Mahakatyayana had sent Srona with 5 specific requests. And looking at these, you really see a community dynamically adjusting its behavioral norms to fit geographical realities. We're talking about practical stuff, allowing ordination with fewer monks, permitting thick, multi-layered leather shoes, frequent bathing, using sheep or deerskin rugs, and even figuring out what to do when robes get lost in transit. It's all about making daily living actually manageable.
Moving to Section 3, the strict footwear precepts. So, now that we know about the exceptions, let's look at the standard, highly specific rules for everyday footwear. It becomes incredibly clear almost immediately that the regulations around leather and footwear were designed to completely eliminate vanity. Monks were absolutely forbidden from mimicking the flashy styles of kings or ministers. No tiger skins, no leopard skins, definitely no peacock feathers or extravagant embroidery. Even heavily dyed leather or clunky wooden clogs were totally off the table.
Instead, the standard was a simple, single-layer leather shoe. And this specific rule perfectly captures the whole monastic ideal for daily living: prioritize humility and reject luxury. If that single-layer shoe tears, you don't just toss it and buy a thick, expensive new pair. You patch it. It's a behavioral norm firmly grounded in simple, unattached living. Fix what's broken, avoid waste.
And there's this fascinating story about monks in Elavi who wore wooden clogs. The Buddha actually banned them. Now, you might think it was just because that loud, clacking noise was super disruptive, and it was. But the main reason was far more profound. Those heavy wooden shoes were accidentally crushing insects on the ground. So the footwear was literally violating the core tenet of nonviolence.
All right, Section 4. Leather skins and high beds. Because the Vinaya meticulously regulated more than just what went on their feet.
It also dictated exactly how monks were supposed to interact with animal skins in their daily lives. The Buddha explicitly forbade pelts from lions, tigers, leopards, and even domestic animals like dogs and cats. This wasn't arbitrary. It was to ensure monks weren't contributing to the exotic animal trade or surrounding themselves with aggressive, predatory symbols.
These behavioral norms didn't stop at the monastery door. They extended into the absolute privacy of their own quarters. Take the monk Channa, for example. He set up this high, luxurious, and honestly poorly maintained bed. The Buddha personally reprimanded him for it. The message was clear: avoiding indulgence is absolutely essential for a focused, grounded monastic life, regardless of who is or isn't watching you sleep.
Which brings us to Section 5, Compassion in Daily Conduct. Let's shift our focus from the materials themselves to the actual behavior.
Because these rules about leather and living weren't just red tape, they were designed to foster deep compassion. And there's a pretty shocking story that illustrates exactly what happens when that compassion is missing. A monk named Nanda was invited to a layperson's home, saw a beautiful, multicolored calf, and decided he wanted its skin for a rug. So he actually killed the calf, took the skin, and left the mother cow literally crying and chasing after him. It's horrifying.
When the Buddha found out, his reprimand was absolutely blistering. Why do you call yourself a monk if you take an animal's life? You have no compassion. That right there is the moral anchor of this entire explainer. Following the rules about what materials to wear means absolutely nothing if you don't have underlying empathy for living beings. In fact, because of Nanda's cruelty, accepting or sitting on raw cowhides was strictly forbidden from then on. But this raises a really fascinating question about monastic living. We know monks had strict physical boundaries. For instance, intentionally touching women was completely forbidden. It was a major behavioral norm. But what happens when a strict rule collides with a life-or-death situation? Well, we actually have the answer, and it's beautiful. There was an incident where women were being swept away by the Asaravati River, and the monks hesitated on the banks, paralyzed by the rule. The Buddha immediately ruled that they absolutely must reach out, grab them firmly, and pull them to safety. Saving a human life completely supersedes the strict physical boundaries of the code. Compassion always wins.
Finally, Section 6, the spirit of the rules. Let's look at how the Buddha expected monks to respect their physical environment. There's this incredibly grounding story where the Buddha is inspecting the monastic quarters and finds a room in absolute disarray. We're talking dirty clothes, grass everywhere, smelly bedding. But instead of just standing there and yelling at the monks, the Buddha essentially acts as a janitor. He silently cleans the room and takes out the trash himself, demonstrating that basic cleanliness and respecting shared spaces are sacred daily duties.
And the why behind this is absolutely crucial. He told them, lay people exhaust their flesh and blood to make donations. You must protect their gifts. Maintaining clean rooms and caring for donated robes or beds wasn't just about being a tidy roommate. It was a direct, behavioral expression of immense gratitude to the lay community who worked incredibly hard to provide for them.
This deep respect extended right down to their daily etiquette, specifically dictating exactly where shoes were forbidden. Taking off your sandals in front of senior teachers, inside stupas, or even in communal dining areas wasn't just a random rule. It was a universal sign of humility. It governed how monks mindfully and respectfully moved through their entire day.
Yet, even with all these strict behavioral norms, there was always room for pragmatism. I love this tiny detail from the texts. If a harsh leather shoe strap is injuring a monk's toe, the Buddha explicitly permitted them to wrap the strap in soft cloth. It's such a small thing, but it perfectly proves that the Vinaya was meant to safely guide monks, not torture them with rigid adherence to the rules. So, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. How do these ancient regulations prove that true spiritual discipline isn't about rigid control at all? As we've seen in this explainer, these aren't just dusty, outdated rules about patching leather shoes or making beds. They are a profoundly timeless blueprint for living a life rooted in boundless compassion, practical adaptability, and deep respect for the world around us. Thanks for exploring this with me.